Attorney General William Barr appeared before the House Judiciary Committee yesterday for the very first time, and the hearing quickly became a heated partisan battle. What else would you have expected as Democrats hurled damning accusations at Barr, including defending the president of crimes and using law enforcement to further the president's election campaign? But Republicans were, of course, quick to defend Barr, claiming Democrats were being hypocritical. Kim Wehle is here to give us a recap of yesterday's hearing. Kim is a CBS News legal analyst and a professor of law at the University of Baltimore. We always love talking to you, Kim. So before we even get into what was said, what was not said, can I just ask as an attorney, does it ever make sense to speak more than you hear? In other words, for the prosecutors to make more noise than the witness? Because we did hear a lot of Democrats pontificating, making points, making statements, but if you were hoping to hear the Attorney General answering questions, you didn't really get a lot of that. I don't know, is that effective, Kim, generally in a hearing?
No, generally in a court hearing, the witness would ask questions for as long as the judge allowed the lawyer to ask the questions, the same in a grand jury. And lawyering, the follow-up questions are almost as important, if not more important, than the initial questions. So having 5 minutes per member of Congress is just truncating it. So it's close to impossible, I think, really, to get to the heart of the questions. In addition, of course, Mr. Barr is very skilled at filibustering, at asking questions about the questions, at having very technical answers that evade really the issue, evade the question, but leave him, for the most part, immune from any perjury charges. And that's what follow-up cross-examination, careful follow-up questions are designed for, is to pin the witness down. It's just impossible to do that in this format.
So then, sort of from your expert opinion, if the overarching purpose of this hearing was to determine, in a way, whether or not the Attorney General sees himself as the Attorney General for the people or a personal attorney for the president, do you think the hearing was successful? Did we sort of suss that out from him?
I do think it was successful in that regard. He didn't really act as a DOJ lawyer, let alone the Attorney General of the United States. And I say it for this reason. Lawyers understand that most of these questions, these hard questions, especially big public policy questions, have a lot of ambiguity. You have to hedge. You have to weigh different sides of the argument. You have to embrace the fact that there are arguments on both sides. He was very sort of forthright, my way or the highway, about a lot of questions, a lot of really important issues. And I think part of why the Democrats were a little bit sort of in a disadvantage here is there are so many problems right now with the Department of Justice, from the politicization of it, from his intervening in prosecutions and sentencings of the president's friends in a way that's unprecedented, to, I think, primarily, most recently, using federal agents, some of them anonymously, to crack down on peaceful protests. I mean, he mentioned a lot about, the federal courthouse in Portland, but we're well beyond that when it comes to federal intervention. So this really is something that should be undertaken over a matter of days, with documentation in advance, so that members of Congress know what the Justice Department's position is on these issues, and then can follow up on details. I mean, this is really a catastrophe for democracy, unfortunately, in this moment. And Mr. Barr really wasn't acting like the Attorney General. He was acting like a very dogged lawyer for the president personally.
And that's one thing that the Attorney General, probably out of all the accusations that were lobbed at him yesterday, Kim, I'm told by people who've interviewed him, who know him, that's one of the things that irks him the most, that he's seen as a toady, a lackey for the President of the United States. But I want to dig in, and that's probably some of the sound that you heard earlier coming from my computer. I was looking back at some of the moments from the hearing yesterday, and there were a couple of instances where lawmakers did get the Attorney General to at least to say something that did not at least jibe with what he had said before. In particular, I want to go back to a moment where Congressman Eric Swalwell asked him about the president's tweets praising Roger Stone for not having the guts to not testify. But In the Mueller report, which Barr claimed to have reviewed to reach a conclusion that there was no obstruction, Barr said he didn't know anything about the president's tweets. It doesn't seem that that would be the case, given what he replied to Eric Swalwell yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, that's another concern, frankly, the number of places where he said, I just don't know about that. You know, he should know about that, even if, I mean, he could be cross-examined on the point that you just made. But again, an attorney general, just so viewers understand, the attorney general and lawyers in general, particularly in that position, the job is to weigh the pros and the cons. There clearly are two sides of the story when it comes to what's happening in our nation's city with police crackdown and federal intervention. There clearly are two sides of the story with the attorney general intervening after a president's tweet regarding Roger Stone to basically turn his back on line prosecutors. There clearly are two sides of the story. Eric Swalwell asked about the pardon of Mr. Stone and how Attorney General Barr said that would be illegal to do a quid pro quo for a pardon in exchange for Mr. Stone's silence. And when asked, you know, is this something the Department of Justice is looking into, he said, why should I, or something in that regard, as if that's a crazy concept. It's not a crazy concept because the Attorney General is there to represent all aspects of American life from the criminal justice standpoint, not just the president. So it doesn't really, it doesn't take a lot but your own logic to see that this person was there to defend the president under any circumstances in light of any facts and even some legal principles. Some people might say that's okay, but at the end of the day, this is the office of the Attorney General we're talking about, and we will have new presidents in the position of the White House. To politicize that office where that person is setting a new standard that he no longer works on behalf of the American people, but he works as a political sort of attack dog for the human being who's in that office. That's very dangerous for the rule of law and for the independence of the Justice Department and for fairness in terms of how our federal justice system is implemented.
Let's talk about this business of systemic racism. The Attorney General said that he did not believe that there was systemic racism in police departments across the country. And like a good lawyer, he picked his words with a specific intent in mind. I want to play what he had to say, and then we're going to talk about it on the back end.
I think it would be an oversimplification to treat the problem as rooted in some deep-seated racism generally infecting our police departments. It seems far more likely that the problem stems from a complex mix of factors which can be addressed with focused attention over time. I don't agree that there's systemic racism in the police department.
Specifically,
generally in this country.
you seem to have a difficult time understanding systemic racism and institutional racism.
Okay, so Kim, there is a nationwide conversation about police reform. What can we do? Do we need strong new legislation? When you keep in mind the Attorney General's perspective on policing and what may be partly responsible for the root problems, you know, what does that say to you about the conversation moving forward about police reform if it's not going to include the impact of systemic racism, because he doesn't think that that's a major issue?
Well, again, the role of the Attorney General is to represent all of the American people. It's not, if you think about who his client is, it's not the president personally. So really, he should be curious about this. He should ask himself, wow, is the fact that there are 6 or 7 times the number of African-American males in our federal prison system than there are white males, or the national prison system, does that tie in part to problems in the policing? Remember, people go to jail because they're arrested. They're arrested by police officers. African-American males are a minority population across the country, but a vast majority in our prison system. So that should be a data point where the Attorney General says, I wonder if this is an issue. People really care about it. Let's look at this. Let's do some more investigative work. There hasn't been a national database around some of these issues since the early 2013, 2015. This is something that is under investigated, under researched, under reported. And the notion that we don't have widespread racism, given our history of slavery in this country, that still lives in our public consciousness, of course, is absurd. And the notion that that's not going to somehow bleed into the police force, that are on the front lines of enforcing the criminal justice system is also absurd. So for him to dismiss this out of hand is a problem. I think people need to think about November and not just voting for president and somebody who's going to have people in these positions that are neutral in terms of paying attention to facts, law, implementing policy in a way that's consistent or fair across the board to all constituencies, but also ask ourselves, who do we want in Congress? Do we want moderates that are going to reach across the aisle and pass legislation that addresses these things? Because frankly, Anne-Marie and Vlad, my position is let's just take stuff off the table for Americans to fight each other about. There are enough issues that to pick these fights over these issues that are really so obvious in need of attention. That's really problematic that this Attorney General is, again, pretending that these aren't gray areas